Welcome to Intune Experts. What we're going to do here is set up Intune from start to finish. We're going to show you the most basic minimal settings that you have to have in place just to turn the feature on. And at that point, you're able to enroll devices. Of course, you can set up all of Intune with device configurations, apps, settings, and then enroll devices. But what we are going to do is show you the most basic settings to set up Intune and get the feature turned on. And then we're going to set up anything that's related to Intune and additional feature sets and options, OneDrive, BitLocker. So if you have a feature that you want to see set up and configured here on Intune Experts, let us know in the comments and we will run through that session for you. Okay, let's start by going to our console. And before we can get started, we have to have groups. Groups is the way you target deployments, configuration profiles, and applications. So to get started, let's create ourselves a few groups. Start here with groups, new group. And the first group I want is a group that I will be using for all Intune administrators. You should always give the group an owner. And I'm not going to set this option, Azure AD roles can be assigned to a group, because we're not going to use this group to assign roles. The next group I want to create is a group for administrator devices. And these groups I use to help set up and manage the environment, as well as validate what I have set up before I target production groups. Now I need one more for my administration purposes, which will be called exclusions. And I will show you how this is used when setting up and validating groups. Give it an owner. Now I need 3 more groups that I want to create. One will be an all users group. This group will be used for all users that will participate in Intune. And then we're also going to assign a license to that group. And then we're going to create 2 groups that we're going to use for personas that will be created for field users and office users. So let's start by creating the all users group. Now let's create a field users group. Now let's create the last office users group. Now that I have my groups in place, I want to create 3 personas that will be used for the users groups for different scenarios and deployments. You can get to personas, which are actually policy sets from devices or apps. If you start from apps, you can see policy sets right here in the middle. If you start with devices, you have to navigate down a bit to see policy sets, and both areas go to the same section. Now let's create our policy sets that will be acting as our personas. This one will be used for our all users persona. And let's create one for our field users. And let's create one for our office users. Now let's map each one of these policy sets, which will be acting as personas, to the relative group. For our all users persona, we're going to assign it to our all users group. Add group, search for our persona, which will be this one, Intune all users. Review and save, click save. Back to policy sets for our Intune field users. Navigate down to assignments, click edit, add new group, and select field users. Review and save. And do the same for our office users. List the personas, select office users, navigate down to assignments, click next, add groups, and select our Intune office users. So now we have our personas set up. Okay, now let's assign a license to the group that we're going to be using for auto-enrollment. And the group we're going to use is our all users group. Well, our all Intune users group. We start by going to groups, selecting a group we want to assign license to, and in the second pane select licenses. Then at the top select assignments, select the group of license you would like to assign, and select save. Now every time you add a member to this group, they will also receive the Intune license and any other license associated. Now let's enable auto-enrollment. Let's go to our console and start off by going to devices, enroll devices. And here up under Windows enrollment, we want to set up automatic enrollment. And what that entails is identifying a group of user accounts, not device accounts, user accounts that will be participating in Intune. Now here, as you can see, it's set to none. We can set it to all, that means all users in the environment, or we can select some, which will let us select a group that we can target specific users. And the group that we're going to use is one of the groups we created, which is called Intune all users, which is the one that we also assign a license to. I've noticed this becomes a little small mistake that users use or organizations run into. They use a different group when assigning a license or setting this group scope. As best practice, the same group you set to receive an Intune license should be set as this scope here. That way you'll never add a user to participate in Intune and you don't have a license. Now let's configure the MAM scope. That's mobile application management. And here, this will be a scope can be set to the same group or a different group, but this will allow you to manage BYOD devices without necessarily having that device enrolled into Intune to manage data and applications access. Here we're going to set it to the same group. Click Save. compliance policies. Now at this point, you can enroll devices. But before you do so, you need to understand some of the default settings, and I suggest changing those default settings so you can monitor your devices as they come into the environment. And I'm specifically talking about compliance settings. Now there's a default compliance setting, and Intune requires that you have a compliance setting in addition to that default compliance setting enabled in targeting your devices. So let's go take a look at this. Let's go to our console. And here, under devices, and compliance policies, here you'll see and have access to your default compliance policies. Now, once you're here, all right, right out of the box, Intune is set up to mark all devices compliant, regardless of the settings of compliancy that you want. By default, it does not block jailbroken devices, and by default, it has a validity period of 30 days. You can shorten this. Back in our SECM days, when you're setting up a lab, a default interval for clients was 60 minutes. And we used to change that down to 5 minutes in a lab so we can see things happening a little faster. But I'm not going to do that within Intune. But what I will do is turn on non-compliant, so when a device is detected as non-compliant, it will mark it as non-compliant. And then we can do other things like conditional access. I'm also going to block jailbroken devices. So there's no way a jailbroken device can get into this environment. And I'm going to leave the default of 30 days for our interval. I'm going to click save. Now I have my default compliance settings set. Now I'm going to set up a baseline compliance because we will require one. Now I'm going to click create policy. Platform will be Windows 10. And I want to point out something here. You can get to this window from a number of different ways. If you start out from just the base of compliant policies, you'll see the platform for all different device types where you can create a compliance policy. However, if you start out somewhere like devices, Windows, and then click on compliance policies. When you create a compliance policy here, it will only give you the option for Windows. From the platform, Windows 8.1 or Windows 10. So we're going to go ahead and create a Windows 10. Click create. We're going to give it a name, simple enough as baseline compliance policy. And here are the options where we can set a compliance policy. But note, you do not even have to set up any of these options just to satisfy the condition that a compliance policy is present. And I'll show you what that means when we get to that point of enrolling a device. See how that device come in, and then we're going to check its compliance, and you'll see that that device compliancy is satisfied just by having a compliance policy targeting it without configuring or changing any settings on the device. So we're going to leave this blank and everything set to defaults, and click next. Now here, this gives it the option to identify the non-compliance immediately with a set of 0 or days after the non-compliancy has happened. And for this lab, immediately notify us by leaving it at 0 when a device is detected as non-compliant. In addition, you can also send an email. Send email to end user. That just really just sends an email to the user saying, hey, your device is not compliant, here's why, and here where you go to go fix that. We're going to use this option, and as you can see, I have to create a template before I can use this option. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this, then later on show you how to add a template, and then come back and configure this with a template to send to a user when a device becomes not compliant. In addition, you also have the option to retire the non-compliant device. That means it will just remove the device from the environment and track it. So we're going to remove the email option and click next. Now here's where we target our groups. Now we haven't created some device groups yet because ideally you want to target device configuration for devices, but there's other reasons to target the devices as well. So we're not going to set a group here, and we're going to go ahead and click next. Now let's create our compliance policy, and there you have it. Now we're going to create the device groups that we need. And for Windows devices, we're going to create 3 different types of groups. 1 to pick up all Windows devices, 2 to pick up personal devices, and 1 to pick up corporate devices. Let's open our console, start out at groups. Let's create a new group. It's going to be a security group. And the name we're going to want to use is Intune. And in this case, since it's a device group, I want to just use INT. Devices, Windows. Here we're going to select dynamic device, give it an owner, and we're going to add our query. And our query statement here, we can use these expressions, but to quickly add it, if you have your syntax already written out, you can add your syntax here and you can still see how the properties line up. Click OK after adding my code. And as you can see here, property type device contains Windows. That's exactly what this means. So let's click Save, click Create. Now we're going to create a BYOD device group. The syntax will be similar. Create a group, similar name. Devices, Windows. BYOD, and I'm just going to put personal. We know it's BYOD. Dynamic device, select an owner, and then add our dynamic statement. And in this case, it's going to be similar, but not exactly. Click Edit, paste, click OK, and here you can see the OS type contains Windows, which is the same as before. The next one is device type ownership contains personal, and that is the syntax for this one. Just click Save, click Create. We now have that group created. Now trash here so I can get my groups to show up. Go ahead and select this because it's going to be a similar group that I'm going to create for corporate devices. And in this one, in this case, I'm going to call this one corporate. Select an owner. Membership type will be dynamic device. Add our syntax here for Windows corporate devices. Click edit, paste our syntax, click OK, and as you can see, the same. Device OS type contains Windows, device ownership contains company. Click save and click create. We now have our 3 dynamic device groups. Now let's talk about our enrollment restrictions. Let's go to devices, enroll devices, enrollment restrictions. And here you'll see you have device type restrictions and device limitations. Let's start out with device limitations, since it's pretty simple. It's always targeted to all users. And the default device limit is 5. What this means is every user can enroll up to 5 devices. That's including Windows, Android, Mac, whatever device types you have. So if you ever come into hit the problem where you can't enroll a system, check to see if you are hitting this device limit. Now for device type restrictions, it's always targeted to all users, or at least the default is targeting to all users. And let's click assign, or not assign, but click on the object, all users, click properties. And as you can see, all device types are allowed. Windows, Mac, iOS and iPads, Android device administrator, and Android enterprise work profile. In addition, for each device type, also personally, BYOD devices are allowed to enroll. You can even use this to restrict or allow devices to enroll based on minimum OS or device OS version. Let me show you the difference. Click edit. You can see you can block or allow device types, and for that device types you can block or allow personal. And here for the version of the device or the device OS, you have a minimum and maximum option. And of course you would get this information from the manufacturer if it was an Android, Windows, or iOS. And as you can see down here, you have a little bit of limitations on how you can restrict or allow based on manufacturer. And currently that's only available on Android. So for right now, we're going to leave these options at default because we are eventually going to allow each one of these devices to enroll each one of these devices. Then we're going to show you what happens when one of these are blocked. The error message is not necessarily clear to the user, but it would be good to know what kind of error messages the user do get when these options are in place to block the device. So since we're going to leave these as set, and as you can see here, you cannot change the scope in which these device policies apply. It must apply to all devices. There's no option to configure it. So since that is set, and we're going to leave these at default, we are going to make one change. We're going to go and make a change to the device limitations, because I'm sure I'm going to hit this device limit in this lab by enrolling and re-enrolling devices, because every time you re-enroll a device, that can potentially add to your device limit count until that previous device is removed, especially in a short amount of time. So let's change this value to the highest value possible. Now, one thing to note, and be wary of this. In Intune, you have a limit of 15. In Azure Active Directory, this number can be higher. So be mindful that this number can be different from the device limit in Azure Active Directory. Go ahead and click Save. And my device restrictions and enrollment restrictions are done. Now let's configure the enrollment status page. Some know this as the ESP. You get access to the ESP here up under Windows Enrollment and click the tab for Enrollment Status page. Here's the default status page that is set up, and as you can see, it's assigned to all users and all devices. Once we get in there, we click on Properties and click Edit to edit the settings. And as you can see, these are the settings that you get. Enrollment status page appears during initial device setup and during first user sign-in. If enabled, users can see configuration progress of assigned apps, profiles targeted to the device. Now, if you want to further configure this, we're going to use the default for starters, but to further configure this is the options that you have. Here you can show this enrollment status page after 60 minutes of inactivity or after an error, or if the process hasn't completed in 60 seconds. The message to show would be here. Here, this option allows the user to collect logs. There will be an option that shows to the user in which they can collect logs. This shows to the user as if it was out-of-box experience. This blocks from continuing until all applications have been installed on the device, or you can allow remaining applications to install after the device is enrolled and the user is logged in. This allows the user to reset the device. This will most likely be on in lab scenarios or testing scenarios where if it fails, you want to quickly reset the device, and you can reset it from the endpoint, the user side, as well as reset it from the console side. This option allows the user to reuse the device even if errors are shown to the user. And again, I would use this in administrative purposes and testing scenarios. And again, this option allows you to block everything unless all required applications are installed first that are assigned to the user or the device before moving on. So we're going to show progress because we want the user to see the errors, use the device if there's errors, and we do not want to block the device at all, so we're going to leave this at default. We don't want to block the device until all apps are installed. We want to use the out-of-box experience as well as allow the user to collect logs. So let's go ahead and click Save. And as you can see, this will target all devices. So keep that in mind. We do not have a way to select different devices from the enrollment status page. Now, in some cases, you may want to skip the enrollment status page, and there is a scenario configuration for that. When we get to that, we will show you how to do that. now let's get ourselves a device set up so that we can do some device enrollment. I will be using Hyper-V for this exercise, and I will be creating and using 2 virtual machines, one for corporate device and one to be used as a personal BYOD device. So for testing purposes, how we create these type of devices is specific to the device and scenario in an attempt to capture the device hardware ID to provision for Intune. And I'll tell you more about that and how Dell or HP or Lenovo or any of those companies would do things to get your devices into the environment just by you simply ordering a device. The vendor gets the order and the device gets shipped directly to the user, fully provisioned because your environment Intune is ready, and that will be the extent of your effort on preparing devices for your users. So let's get started with the first virtual machine that we're going to be using. So first we're going to start this virtual machine up, get to the desktop, and then show you how we capture and create the hardware ID that we will then turn around and use in Intune. Nearly finished completing this virtual machine build, and then we'll be at the desktop shortly. Okay, at this point, we want to just get to the desktop, so we're going to log in and create a local account. Click accept on the policy privacy settings. Yeah, I will accept here as well. Okay, the build is done. I'm not going to connect with enhance. We'll acknowledge my network discovery. Now here I want to create the hardware hash, and I do that with a PowerShell script. Now, to get this PowerShell script and the command that we need to use, we're going to navigate to a website, one of Microsoft Docs locations. Okay, we're going to start by going to a web page. And the web page we want to go to is here. Manually register devices with Windows Autopilot. And all you need from this area is this PowerShell code here. Once I have my code, open up a command prompt. Then open up a notepad. Paste the code that you captured from the web page. And I can't capture it right now, but I can do this. The first command I want to use is set execution, so that my PowerShell script can run. Here I want to enable PowerShell. Then get the command that I want to run. Now I'll go back to the notepad that I had created and create a whole PowerShell file out of this code. We're going to leave it on the C drive in a folder. Close the notepad, minimize the command prompt. Navigate to the folder I just created with the profile, with the PowerShell. CD into the folder and run the command, which should be WHID PS1. I have to elevate the command prompt. I should have known that. Now I run the PowerShell command. I haven't disabled the script. Okay, I have the hardware ID now. Just remember, you have to elevate your command prompt before running the PowerShell and running this command. Let's close that. Now let's go where it created the file for me. And you'll notice new folder called WHID, Autopilot HWID. Hardware ID. So we're going to copy that. We're going to jump into this enhanced version so I can copy out the file through the virtual machine. See, I can right click, copy, paste on the desktop of my Hyper-V machine, paste, which I already have one, and paste the new file. Just so that some of you may not have known that, if I switch back to a standard view, I would not be able to do that. Right click, I can copy, but you see that there's no paste. So that's the reason why I did that. Now let's take this hardware ID, and I'm going to show you the contents of this hardware ID and what it looks like, and upload it to Intune, which is the step that you take to provision a device to go through Intune. Excuse me, to go through Autopilot in Intune. This is the data that's in this file. Open Intune console, and we're going to start from the home, go down to devices, enroll devices, way over here up under Windows Autopilot deployment program, to devices. Once here, you want to import, select the file that we just generated, which in my case it should be on the desktop, so that should be this one. Import this file. Make sure you get a green check mark that indicates all the rows are formatted correctly, and you should be successful enrolling this device. Now, you may not be successful if the hardware ID is already in the list, and I say that because this list can get quite extensive and you may or may not check it before importing this file. So let's go ahead and import. This takes a while. I'm not sure as to how long, but I'm going to time it now, and I think it takes about 3 or 4 minutes for this to happen, or maybe longer, because this actually indicates up to 15 minutes. So we'll wait. We'll actually watch that and see how long that takes, because we're going to come back here and it's actually going to tell us how many minutes it took. So we're not going to wait. Okay, it looked like it's finished. So now, once that is done, you can click refresh to see the object there. Notice this long serial number. These long serial numbers only show up on virtual machines. On real hardware, it will be a shorter number. So there you have it. My device is imported and provisioned for Autopilot. Now all I have to do is make sure that everything else is set up, like a deployment profile, and then simply reset the device that I was just on, that I created this hardware ID from. So let's go look at our deployment profiles. That would be this right here. Now we want to create one for Windows PC. And this one is going to be for Azure, not hybrid, because we haven't gotten to the hybrid scenario yet. So this is going to be a Azure AD join deployment. Now, see this here? Convert all targeted devices to Autopilot. What this does is, if the device hardware ID is not in the device list, this will convert the device to a Autopilot device and create an instance of that device in the device list without importing it. We're not going to do that at this time. We're just going to click next. Now here, this is going to be a user-driven scenario. And we also have the option of using a self-deploying scenario. So for starters, we're going to use a user-driven scenario. We're going to leave it on Azure AD join. And as you can see, you can also have hybrid. And this option does give you different options when you select it. As you can see, some are grayed out because it's self-deploying. But this is going to be a user-driven. So we're going to show the Microsoft license and terms, and then hide them later. We're going to show the privacy settings, then hide them later. Right now, by default, it hides the option to change account. We're going to show that. By default, the device creates a standard user on the device. We're going to create an administrator on the device because we're testing and want to be able to get into the device if anything go wrong. So when you're setting up Intune and Autopilot for the first time, set the user account type to be administrator to start out. This will not be a white glove deployment to start out, so we're going to leave this option as the default, as well as the language. And we're going to automatically configure the keyboard because we're using English. And yes, we're going to use a device name template so that we can dynamically name the computers as devices enrolled through Autopilot into Intune. So we're going to select yes. We're going to create, the first few words will be auto for Autopilot. I'm going to add a dash, and I'm actually going to use the random numbers because I don't want such a long computer name. I just want something to quickly reference a device. So I'm just going to use auto random with this number to 4, which is going to give me a random 4 numbers. Now here, we want to target our device groups. Yes, in actuality, we want to target only Autopilot devices. So how do we do that? We create a dynamic group that only picks up devices that has gone through Autopilot. So let's go create that group, and we'll come back and assign a group later. So let's continue by clicking next. Create this deployment profile. And then we're going to go back to groups and create a dynamic group that will automatically pick up Autopilot devices. Let's start out with giving it a name, int dash devices Windows Autopilot. A dynamic device group, give it an owner, add dynamic rules, and the command line we're going to use or syntax, click edit, add our syntax, click OK, and as you can see there's a device physical IDs is any that contains the ZTD ID. That is the indicator for devices that has gone through Autopilot. Click save. You can keep this in mind that whenever you create a dynamic group, it takes up to 2 minutes for that device to become active with the members from the syntax. Let's click create. You can wait a while for that to happen. And for your edification, the information where to get this syntax for creating a dynamic group for Windows Autopilot devices will be in the comments. Now let's go back and assign those restrictions and device limitations to the dynamic groups that we have just created. So let's start by going to devices, compliance policy, because we did create a compliance policy, and we're going to target it to both our personal and corporate devices because we do want both device types to be compliant. So we'll click on properties, go down to assignments, and up under included groups, we're going to select add groups. And here we're going to select our Windows corporate devices and our Windows personal devices. I'm going to go ahead and click review and save. So now I'm going to do the same for our device restrictions. Let's go to, no, not our device restrictions, because that is our deployment profile. So we're going to go to devices, enroll devices, and deployment profiles. select the deployment profiles. And we select properties. Go down to assignments, click edit, select add groups. And here we're going to select our Windows corporate and our Windows personal. In actuality, we don't want to do personal at this point. We only want to register and enroll corporate devices. Personal devices, we're going to treat a different way. Click select, review and save, click save, and now that's done. Okay, now let's start this virtual machine and watch it go through the process of auto-enrolling via Autopilot. But first, we have to add a user to that all users group. Let's go open the console. Let's go to our groups and access our Intune all users, the one that has the Intune license assigned. And to show you the most important license that we're talking about is this one. This is the license that must be enabled. Go to members, add myself as a member. Now let's go back and start the virtual machine. Okay, here we go. Enter my login ID. because of the enrollment status page that we configured, we can allow the user to see what's going on. Now it's down to the next section and continue. Except on the privacy settings. Continue by clicking OK. Requiring MFA at this point. Set a pin. Pin is set. Device should be enrolled at this time. Let's go confirm that. As you can see, it's still setting up. I'm waiting for this network discovery. Now let's go confirm the device enrollment, even though it just told us. Click Start. Settings. Accounts. Access work or school. And as you can see, connected to Intune Experts Azure AD, and if you click this widget, you'll see this info button. Whenever you see this info button on this area, that means the device is enrolled. Click the info button, you can get more information about the device being managed. Areas managed by Intune. scroll down, you can see that you have the option to sync the device. As you can see, current date, current time matches current date, current time. I can sync the device here or sync it from the console. Now let's confirm the computer's name and then go confirm this device has actually made it into Intune. Let's go back to the beginning, system, and down to the About section. And as you can see, the device name is Auto-enrollment, and as you can see, it was renamed with that naming template that I used, and it only generated 4 numbers. So we should see this device name in our Intune tenant. Let's open up the console, navigate to devices, and before we even get to the overview, as you can see, we have 1 device enrolled. Intune enrolled devices. See the time, total. Click on Windows. We should see that device, and it is compliant. And the reason why it's compliant because of the 2 compliance policies we set up. Because the default compliance policy requires that you have a compliance policy, basically a manually created or a custom compliance policy. To see that compliance policies, this is the baseline compliance policy, and as you can see, device status hasn't been touched yet. Oh, that's another thing. Reporting is rather slow to get back to the console, so to see reporting, you do have to give it time. And there you have it. Enabled Intune with the most basic settings possible just to start enrolling devices.